Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar. We will get started in just a minute, but we invite you to connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR. On Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. And on LinkedIn, follow us at Campaign for GLR. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's conversation, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Okay, once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce the conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city, or state and your organization. Be sure when sending chat messages to select panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are going to be encouraged to participate in listen-only mode during the beginning of the session. We'll be using breakout rooms later and encourage your participation in the small group conversations, where we'll invite you to come on camera and off mute to dive deeper into the topic. We invite for you to post any questions that you might have in the chat box during the large group section, and the session is being recorded. The recording, as well as any slides and resources shared, will be sent in a follow-up email to all who registered for this meeting. And we are offering live ASL interpretation services. You'll see the interpreters on your screen for the duration of the session. We do remind you to speak one at a time, slowly and clearly in group situations. And finally, we'll be having a brief poll launched right towards the end of the conversation. We highly encourage you to respond, as this helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. And before we start, I'd like to turn your attention to some of our upcoming webinars. Later this afternoon, we have a session co-sponsored by New America at 3 p.m. that will be focused on creating environments and conditions for thriving kindergartners. Next week, we have an exciting doubleheader, starting with a funder-to-funder conversation on philanthropic opportunities for enhancing local learning landscapes, followed by early learning innovation in a time of crisis. Then we'll invite you to wrap up the month of February with a session on preventing burnout and resignation, investing in teacher coaching and support. Registration and information will be posted in the chat box now, and we hope you can join us for those opportunities. Joining you now is Malai Amfar, Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you so much, Sierra. I want to wish everybody happy Valentine's Day. Thank you for choosing to spend your lunchtime with us today as we explore opportunity culture and learn a little bit more about the ins and outs of this program. Sierra, could you please go to the next slide and we will rest here for a second. Since it is Valentine's Day, I would, if we were in person, be sharing candy hearts, but since we don't have that, I have this treat for you today, which is this session about opportunity culture. This is an innovative program that uses multi-level structure of leadership and coaching for teachers, ultimately creating a system of support. We do acknowledge that the past few years have been so challenging, not only for our education workforce and for all of us that do community-based programming for children, but also for our students and all the youth that we're supporting. So in this program today, we're going to hear a little bit about how we can create some resilience and how opportunity culture leads to that. Today's conversation is a little bit different. If you have attended any of our Crucible of Practice sessions, you know and are familiar with how we are using webinar. Today, we're using meeting very intentionally. We're using the Zoom meeting format so that we can turn up the lights. This is a theater reference. Turn up the lights in the house and see everybody and have a true conversation around implementation and have some back and forth with the panelists today. We will hear from a full panel who will share an overview about the program. That will be the beginning piece of our session today. And then we will switch into small group breakout rooms towards the end where we can have conversation with folks. Full biographies will be in the chat soon. I'll place those in the chat very soon. Before we switch into introducing Stephanie Dean, I would like to ask an icebreaker question for everyone. If everyone could please just take a moment and share one thing that you're hoping to take away from today's session. By sharing that out, that will help us form those questions and discussion points when we go into the breakout room. So again, please share one thing that you're hoping to take away from today's session. And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is Stephanie Dean. Stephanie Dean is the Senior Vice President and Strategic Lead for Public Impact. She works diligently on identifying and cultivating state policy conditions that help schools extend the reach of excellent teachers. Her passion and care for our young learners is evident in her work history, and we are so fortunate to have her joining us today. Again, full bio will be in the chat soon. So at this moment, please, Sierra, if you could go to the next slide, and I will pitch it to Stephanie. Thank you.
Thanks, Malai, and thanks everybody for joining today. I'm really happy to be with you and have this chance to feature opportunity culture and tell you a little bit about this work, but also to be on with a couple of the districts that we've worked with, currently are working with, and have worked with in the past. I'm really glad to be here today. I'll switch to the next slide just to get us started. I work at Public Impact, and we're a consulting firm. We're based in North Carolina, but we work with school districts across the country. And we've been around for a couple of decades. Our firm started out as a research and consulting firm. You might notice that I dropped the research from my description of our firm, always looking for investments in solutions that would provide dramatically different results for students, particularly students in the education system whose needs had not been well met. And so our research used to cover a variety of fronts. Opportunity culture is a concept that we wrote about back in about 2009, the early paper that we put out. And like many consulting firms, we put out a white paper and we thought, we hope people will like this idea and they might put it into practice. In about 2013, that was the first year that we actually engaged with a district to see the first opportunity culture models go into place. And that was Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools on the call with us today. So they've been at this work quite some time. That was early days. It was experimental. There were lots of different staffing models that we were experimenting with. I think 24 or 25 different staffing models, looking to see which of these types of staffing models, based on the idea of extending the reach of excellent teachers to more students, which of these would have the best results for students. If you fast forward a little bit into the future, 2018, we had our first third-party results come out from an evaluation, and I'll share a little bit about that with you in my overview. But that really helped us see some exciting results for students and to feel very committed to the idea of working directly with districts across the country to scale this to more teachers and more students. We feel very passionately about the potential for this work and the many ways it can help the education system. So that's a little bit about Public Impact. My role at the firm is outreach. And so I'm always looking for state leaders who want to get this work going in their states, district leaders who want to try this work, and other partner and advocacy organizations who want to learn about it and talk to others in their communities to see if this has potential in your local setting to leverage the goals that you're trying to achieve, particularly for this group related to achieving grade level learning and surpassing grade level learning. On this next slide, you just see a picture of where we are working on opportunity culture across the country. So you can see there's a swath of districts that go across the South. We're not just focused on the South, that's just the way this has happened to work out. You will notice in this map, there are clusters of these dots, and that's not by chance. Much of this work has been started in local communities based on philanthropic support and the encouragement of state leaders to help districts think about the power of different staffing structures in their schools and to encourage them to take this on, to opt into the work. So 85% of the districts that we've worked with over the years have had some type of philanthropic support to get started. Now I'll describe to you how the models are meant to be sustainably designed using existing dollars. They don't go away when the grant dollars run out, but many districts do benefit from some initial technical assistance to help rethink their staffing structures in schools and also to provide professional learning for the educators who are selected into these roles and who are getting ready to implement for the first time. On the next slide, you'll see the high-level vision of opportunity culture design. I like to start here because it really emphasizes the two essential North Stars of this work. When we do staffing model co-design work with districts, we're always trying to achieve these two goals simultaneously. The first is ensuring that every student has consistent access to excellent teaching. So we're thinking about every day when they go to their school, every year that they're in the K-12 system, they are experiencing excellent teaching day to day. And we know that doesn't always happen, especially in times of teacher shortages and vacancies. And the second part of this vision is that every educator has excellent career opportunities, so chances to advance in the profession. And we're talking about chances to advance as a teacher, as a classroom teacher, continuing to teach students. We don't want our students to lose access to our excellent teachers. We want to think of staffing models that can help those teachers who want to stay in the classroom and continue to teach students to be able to do that, at the same time extending their reach to more students and helping to influence their colleagues in their schools to achieve greater learning for students. So I'll give you a little bit of a snapshot overview on this next slide, just a high level picture of what is it that districts are doing, schools that are doing when they put opportunity culture staffing models into place, and why do they get involved in this work. Changing staffing models in schools is pretty difficult work. We know schools have been very traditionally designed for many, many years. It's been the one teacher, one classroom model. You as a teacher, whether you're a first-year teacher who's assuming a classroom for the first time, or a knock it out of the park teacher who's been getting great results with your student, usually you're assigned a classroom of students with about the same number of students in that classroom. So on the top picture that you see here, these circles are just meant to illustrate that traditional one teacher, one classroom model. We put about 25 students in each of these classrooms. That varies by local system. But the fact is that regardless of where you fall on that spectrum of your teaching career, you have about the same assignment on day one of your career as you would on the last day of your career. Those aqua colored bubbles are meant to represent excellent teachers. We use them to signify the top quartile of the teaching profession. Every teaching profession has every profession has a bell curve in terms of effectiveness. You have a lot of people in the middle of that bell curve that are doing a pretty good job. You have a top quartile of every profession that gets really great results at what they do. And in teaching, we can think of those as the teachers that you want to be able to extend their reach to more classrooms and have more students benefit from their great instruction. When you think about in this traditional model being a student, we know, especially for you all who are focused on parents and getting parents involved in their child's education and their child's learning to read, many parents are hoping that their child in this coming school year will land in one of those aqua colored classrooms so that they can excel during that year of instruction. And what we want to do is change the staffing model to make sure that every child is being influenced by the instruction of those great teachers. You also notice that red circle, the principal of our schools, and you know that this job is a very demanding job, very difficult. The amount of direct reports that a principal has is far more than most professions. Most professions would have about 5 direct reports, people reporting that they're responsible for, but principals have massive spans of responsibility. And the notion that a person who assumes all the responsibility of the school can also be the instructional leader for all of the teachers is pretty challenging. So when you shift down to the bottom picture on the screen, it just gives you a little bit of a simplified view of what opportunity culture schools are trying to do. One of the things you might notice immediately is the boxes that are formed. This is shifting to a team-based approach to instruction. And we often see team teaching in schools where you might trade based on subject areas with a teacher, but this is team teaching in the sense that a multi-classroom leader, that Aqua Bubble is now an MCL, multi-classroom leader, is carefully selected for getting great results with students and exhibiting adult leadership competencies. And they are now working very closely with their team of teachers, the T's representing the teachers on their team, and paraprofessionals that are integrated into their team. That RA in the circle is meant to signify a reach associate. That's what we call it in opportunity culture schools. But the key there is that it's a paraprofessional role that's instrumental on the team, providing release time for the multi-classroom leader to coach their team teachers, providing small group instruction. They can be running a learning lab where small group tutoring, high dosage tutoring is happening during the school day. That can be built into the school day. Students will experience in this model some type of rotation through classrooms, and the schedule is carefully constructed to allow those things to happen. The multi-classroom leader to lead the team teachers to engage in instruction under the leadership of the multi-classroom leader, and this paraprofessional to be integrated onto the team. One thing I want to point out before I shift to the next slide is that in the top picture, you see the V's meant to indicate vacancies, and we know those are prolific in schools, and they're very difficult, very challenging for districts to be able to fill those vacancies. We know that the traditional approach to vacancies is to look for an adult to go into that classroom. We also know that often ends up meaning that a permanent substitute is plugged into a classroom until a teacher can be found. And that can have devastating results for students when you think of the instructional experience they have in that year. In opportunity culture models, those vacancies can be traded, and that helps to fund that paraprofessional position on the team. It also helps to fund a supplement for the multi-classroom leader so that they can make a lot more because they're taking on a very important leadership role, and it's a very demanding role, and it has huge implications for student learning. So that's kind of a lot on that one slide, but just wanting to give you that kind of picture of what's happening in opportunity culture design. When districts and schools sign up to do this work, this is the type of change that they're creating. It's change that has implications for the day-to-day of how instruction is happening in the schools, and it has massive implications for the day-to-day experience that their students are having in their schools. So on this next slide, you'll see the opportunity culture design principles, and you can click through. I guess these are animated. There's 5 principles that you can click through, so those will all come up. The design looks different school to school. That was a very simplified picture that I gave you before, and each school figures out how many multi-classroom leaders they want to work into their structure. What will the size of those teams be? What will the grade levels be on a team? Will there be teams that are focused on instructional areas? That looks different school to school. It's not a cookie cutter approach, but the design that you see districts and schools put into place always adheres to these 5 principles. The designs are always going to be reaching more students with excellent teachers and their teams. It's always going to be a team-based instructional model, and that idea of extending the reach of excellent teachers. Teachers are always going to be paid more for extending their reach. These models allow you to pay the multi-classroom leader more. They pay for the paraprofessional role, which can also be a teacher resident in that role. But they can also pay other teachers on the team. They can pay them more as well. When you use those vacancies and you trade the vacancies to pay supplements, you can create a supplement for your team teachers also. The work that they're doing is different than what a teacher would do in a one teacher, one classroom model. It is quite demanding, and they will get great results with their students. The third principle is very important. I alluded to this before, that pay is funded within regular budgets. So we're trading existing dollars. We're thinking about the way schools have been budgeted and the roles that are in place in schools, the way dollars are being spent year to year, and are we getting the results that we were hoping for students? And we're helping the schools reallocate their own funds to pay these stipends for their teacher leaders. So this is meant to be a staffing design that lasts into the future. The fourth principle here is about time, and time is so important. I know many of you in the campaign are focused on out of school time, trying to create more learning time for students and more settings for that learning to take place. In opportunity culture design, we're very focused on maximizing the learning time that's occurring during the school day and making sure that students have time with Reach Associate paraprofessionals, other adults in the classroom, with rotations of teachers to get that small group instruction. Also for those multi-classroom leaders to have the time to lead their team. They do lesson planning with their team, they evaluate data with their team, and they get in there and they coach with their team. They might coach from the back of the classroom, they might model instruction from the classroom. They're very hands-on with their team, and their students, the team students are their own students. They're accountable for that student learning, and that gets to that fifth principle that you see there. This is a type of coaching arrangement where your multi-classroom leader is sharing responsibility for the student learning on your team, knows all of your students, has analyzed the data for all of your students, and is helping you as a team teacher figure out what to do the next day with your student and how to get the best results. On this next slide, I'll just give you a little bit of it. I won't spend much time on this slide, but just a little bit of a overview of these names that I'm throwing out there for these roles. You'll hear more about this when Charlotte Mecklenburg and Winchester share about the work they're doing. And you'll see how these roles are applied to different local contexts. But the models will always have the multi-classroom leader role that leads that team. They'll always have Reach Associate, sometimes a teacher resident can be used in that paraprofessional role to support the team. And then this middle role, it says team teacher, but you'll notice when you hear districts talk about local application of opportunity culture models, this team Reach teacher role that can be on teams can be called a variety of things. You might hear expanded impact teacher or direct reach teacher, but the idea is another role as part of the career ladder in opportunity culture schools where teachers can reach more students directly. We advise schools to always put these roles on a multi-classroom leader team because we've seen in research that that gets the best results for students. I mentioned that in 2018, we had our first third-party study come out about opportunity culture. This next slide shows you the study results of that study combined with study results from another study that was done in 2021 using the same methodology. If you could just advance to that next slide, folks, we'll see the study overview. So this picture we put together to capture, we saw similar results of both studies. You can see the citation on the bottom of the screen. On the left side, it's capturing a picture of those results with these bars that you see here. In the reddish orange bar, you're seeing where team teachers started on average. So before they were on multi-classroom leader teams, we saw the team teachers teaching at about the 50th percentile. What this is indicating to us is we had a typical bell curve of teachers like you would see in any profession. So you have some high flyers, you have a lot of people that are kind of solid in the middle, you'll have some struggling teachers. When they were on multi-classroom leader teams, we saw their performance jump notably. So you see them performing at the 77th percentile on average in those aqua colored bars. This is showing you that when on a multi-classroom leaders team, a top quartile teacher leading a team through a role that's carefully designed with lots of time to support and coach their team teachers, the practice of the teachers really takes off and they're able to mirror the learning results that top quartile teacher exhibited before he or she became a multi-classroom leader. So these were pretty exciting results for us in 2018. It really did have implications for how we thought about going kind of all in on opportunity culture and working with districts and schools across the country to bring this to more local settings. We think it's dramatically different learning results for students, and that's what our firm has always been looking for. When you look over on the right side of the screen, you'll see a translation of these percentiles to what does this mean for kids, since that always is kind of the boiling it down to what it means for student learning each year. These gains equate to an extra half year of learning for students each year on average. So you can imagine if you have multi-classroom leader teams in place in your school district from kindergarten to 12th grade, and you're getting an extra half year of learning for students each year over the course of their K-12 career, it really is quite dramatic what they can achieve. It's very important to us that we know that these models can get great results for students, but we also need these models to feel good to teachers, and we need them to help teachers love what they're doing. On this next slide, we show you some results that we have from an annual survey we do of folks in opportunity culture schools. And on the left side in the orangish red circles, you'll see the results from multi-classroom leaders, people who are in that team leadership role in their schools. And in the aqua colored circles, you'll see all opportunity culture staff. So we also want to know, how does it feel to the rest of the folks in the school? And you can see these just three responses that we pulled out of the survey. Do they want opportunity culture to continue in their school the next year? Overwhelmingly, yes. I mean, you don't often see this when you have different types of strategies and interventions going into place in schools. It's not always overwhelmingly this type of sentiment that we want this to continue the next year, depending on how it is landing for teachers. So teachers do like these models and want them to continue. That next response, you see that teachers agree that they're being held to high professional standards in delivering instruction. They feel that expectation for student learning is high, and they feel that they're being held to those high standards. And they also believe that opportunity culture design is supporting changes and improvements in their instructional practice. So the expectation is high for student learning, but they also feel supported to be able to achieve those high goals for their students. So that combination, I think, really gives you a little bit of a flavor of how teachers are feeling in the schools where this is in place. I've got just one more slide to show you. One of the goals that Malai mentioned at the top of the call, or that we saw in the little infographic, is the importance of overcoming unfinished learning as a result of COVID disruptions in schools. And I just wanted to note here for you that opportunity culture staffing design has been cited in an array of publications related to just that topic. And we know that anytime we introduce change into schools, it's on the backs of teachers to put that change into practice in their classrooms. And they often are largely working unsupported and alone. They might have PLCs where they meet with colleagues, but really it's on them to get it done day to day in their classrooms. And we've heard teachers talk about how this feels lonely and this feels overwhelming. And so I just wanted to kind of stamp that point that in opportunity culture staffing models, teachers feel differently and they're supported, and it makes it much more feasible for them to introduce the types of changes that they as instructors might know are needed, but they just need support to be able to get there with their students. And on this last slide, I have my email address up here if anybody's interested in reaching out. And also I encourage you, if you're excited about this after the webinar, to please explore our website. We have a lot of resources that capture the voices of teachers and principals who are doing this work. And we'd love for you to click through some of that at your leisure.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Lots of really great information shared there. And I feel like now that we have a foundation established for what the program is, it's time to transition and hear a little bit about community voice and what this program looks like in practice. So I'm really pleased to introduce to everybody today Bashay Ferris with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School District in North Carolina, where he serves as the program manager for the CMS Teacher Leader Pathway. As a former teacher, he brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to this role, as well as empathy. And so it is my pleasure to introduce Bashay. I'll kick it off to you now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bashay Ferris. I am the manager of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Teacher Leader Pathway, which is our version of opportunity culture. So I will just jump right in because we had such a great introduction from Stephanie and kind of foundation set. And let's start off with the history on this next slide. All right. So we are the oldest opportunity culture program that is in North Carolina, at least. I believe it is on a national level as well. We started in 2013 with a program called Project Lift, which was created for certain schools, certain high need schools, as a strategy to try to see, does opportunity culture help with student gains? Does it also help with retention and recruitment? In order to widen the scope, we actually introduced a second program in 2015, and that was Success by Design. Success by Design went on to get a grant from the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, which served as our kind of intro and soiree into how to get opportunity culture really established in a wide range of schools. Originally, they were in Title I's high need schools, but Success by Design had a very wide scope, which also included affluent schools. It went from pre-K all the way up through 12th grade. In 2019, the two programs actually merged into one, which was a great kind of melding of the minds, because what we were able to do was take the best of both programs. We learned what worked, what didn't work, what were some things that we could improve on. We streamlined a lot of processes, which we will talk about some of those processes in subsequent slides. And finally, this year, after the grant has been exhausted, and the grant, like Stephanie has said, is our jump in. It's not for districts to rely on. This is supposed to be a sustainable program, and ours is. So the district did pick up the funding for our district staff, which supports the program, but on a school-based level, all those positions are funded within regular budgets. If we hop into the next slide, we could see just how large of a program this is. In our talent pool, there are 709 eligible teacher leaders. With the upcoming school year, in the 23-24 school year, there will be 112 participating schools. I know that's larger than some districts. I will say that is more than half of our district, and the goal is within the next 5 years to have full district implementation. We can jump into the next slide, please. So looking at our vision, it's going to seem the vision and our key strategies are going to look very familiar to what the opportunity culture model is. And that's to positively impact and increase school culture, teacher recruitment and retention, teacher effectiveness, and student achievement. So how are we doing that? Let's look at our key strategies on the next slide. So we are ensuring that every student has greater access to excellent teaching by integrating TLP into every school. This cohort that we are now onboarding right now is our largest yet. So we are at 22 schools, and we still have a couple schools that will be added over the next couple months. We have changed our design, which I'll talk about in a little bit, which is making that possible. But that's just a testament to how this is a constantly changing process and how districts have the ability to tailor it to what their needs are in the moment. We pay excellent teachers more for reaching more students successfully. Aside from adding on additional responsibilities to a teacher, it's important that this is seen as education is seen as a career. And a lot of times it's become a job. This is a career. This is something that people can grow in. They can work towards a goal. They can make sure that they have a sustainable living. And we do that with the teacher leader pathway, taking on those extra responsibilities. And finally, we're providing a way for all schools to sustainably fund teacher leader pathway positions. No grant money is used to create positions. We do have the flexibility with vacancies. Like Stephanie was talking about, we can also use Title I money. We've used something called Restart money. Typically, we're not picky as long as the funding sources don't have restrictions on how it is applied to our positions. And we can jump to the next slide, please. So these are the 5 positions that we host here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. You'll see MCL1 and MCL2, that's familiar. That's the multi-classroom leader 1 and 2 positions. The expanded impact teacher positions are our version of the reach team teacher. And we actually switched over to this nomenclature when we took on the teacher leader pathway name and merged our 2 programs. So looking at these positions, the expanded impact teacher 1 and the expanded impact teacher 2 are classroom-based positions. So those positions will be completely in the classroom. Those are your high-performing teachers. If you've got high-performing teachers in your school, chances are they are doing the duties of these roles already. They could take larger class sizes, up to 20% larger. They serve as model classrooms. They'll lead professional learning community meetings. They'll lead professional development for the school, and they will serve on committees. We do allow our expanded impact 2 teachers to coach 1 or 2 teachers, depending on circumstance. Typically, that is in preparation for an expanded impact teacher 3 role. The expanded impact teacher 3 role is pretty unique. So what that is it's a blending of that classroom-based EIT 1 and 2 with some of the duties of a multi-classroom leader 1. And that really helps schools have that flexibility when they can't do a full release and take someone out of the classroom. They need them to be a teacher of record for a group of students, but they also need to coach and expand their coaching ability and support. So these folks are in the classroom 50% of the time, and they are also coaching and supporting instruction 50% of the time. They can take larger class sizes. They will also serve as model classrooms. They will coach up to 2 teachers. We don't want to take them further than that if they have their own full class load and they are a teacher of record. And like the EIT 1 and 2, they will lead PLCs, professional development, and serve on committees. Our multi-classroom leader 1, I think this is where we have a little bit more commonality with some of the other districts implementing. These are release time teachers. So these are teachers that are no longer classroom based. They are out and they are coaching, they are supporting instruction. And that could look like pulling small groups, modeling in classrooms, that could be pushing into classrooms and co-teaching. There are many different ways to do that. And then on planning periods, they're leading data meetings. They are making sure that materials and planning is in place, looking at how that data is going to inform instruction coming up for later in the school year. The real difference between our multi-classroom leader 1 and 2 is experience and how many people you're able to coach, essentially. After you've had some experience in a formal leadership position where you've been coaching instructionally, we do allow people to apply for the higher role, which is up to 10 teachers. Multi-classroom leaders are a maximum of 6. So what do these roles make? How much are they making? Let's take a look at that in the next slide. So these are game-changing differentials. These are very, very big. Our first expanded impact 1 and 2 teachers, those are $2,250 and $4,500 for those roles. When you get into the EIT3 and the MCL roles, you'll notice there are 2 sets of numbers. It's actually not a range, it's an either or. And what we do there is the lower number is for a non-Title I school, and the higher number is for Title I schools. And there's 2 different reasons for that. The first reason is Title I schools are historically harder to attract talent to recruit teachers and high impact teachers. So by increasing the differential for the teachers in that school, it is more attractive for them to move into those Title I schools. The other reason is that non-Title I schools typically do not have the budgets of Title I schools, but we don't want them to be restricted into not being able to afford the differentials for these positions. So they have a lower differential, which is subsequently lower pay, but they are able to afford that and still have the positions in the school. So it's really a trade-off of where do you want to work versus what position you're able to take on. So picking out these positions, it is not something that you just apply for one of the positions. When you apply to the program, you apply to the talent pool as a whole. And let's take a look at the talent pool process in the next couple slides, and I'll explain that to you all. So in our talent pool process, candidates will apply to the pool, and we have a talent pool screening committee, which will look at a comprehensive picture. We will look at years of experience. We look at the last 2 years of summative evaluation ratings. For teachers, we'll look at standards 1 and 4. And for those on the licensed support staff rubric, we will look at standards 1 and 5. We will also look at growth data and impact. First choice, EVAS, and the EVAS really just makes it more easy for the easier for the talent pool screening to commit. What we can do though is we can look at other forms of data if EVAS is not available. So we have considered MAP data, we've looked at TRC data, we've looked at M-class data. So there are different options for different types of teachers to apply and get into the pool. We're not limiting access. Another part of that is the micro-credential option, which we actually started implementing 2 years ago. What the micro-credential is, it is like doing a section of the national board certification. It's evidence-based practice. If you are already coaching and leading in your building, a lot of the artifacts that are required are things that you probably will already have. If you are striving towards that, it provides a great opportunity for these teachers to be reflective in their practice and kind of take on new opportunities outside of their comfort zone. The difference between the talent pool screening process for expanded impact teachers 1 and 2 and the EIT3s and the MCLs is once we determine a candidate is eligible for a higher role, we will invite them to a virtual interview. And what that virtual interview is is we have 2 situational questions, and we will also put an observation. We'll show a teacher teaching, and they'll give that highest leverage action step. We want to see how you coach, how you hold those coaching conversations. What are the components of the conversation? What kind of resources are you providing? So that is how we do our talent pool screening. We found that that was a big game changer in terms of the progress of the program and making sure that we were really having that impact that we desired. In those first couple of years, we did not have a talent pool, and we weren't really seeing as large. We were seeing impact, but we were not seeing as large of an impact as when we limited to get that top quartile that Stephanie was talking about by implementing the talent pool process. So how do we prepare schools to implement this program? Big culture shift. So we can look at the next slide, please. So when schools are preparing to implement the teacher leader pathway, they have to change their culture, they have to change their schedules, they have to change classroom models and design, and it's a lot of mindsets that they have to change as well. So in the next slide over here, we can look at kind of the overall steps, and I'll give a little bit more information after that. So schools will first complete an interest form, and they will verify with their learning community superintendent that they have approval to join the program. We find that learning community superintendents typically have a good grasp on what other challenges a school might be facing. It is typically better to look at a school holistically and say, are they ready to implement now? Versus kind of letting everybody just try to jump in and try it. The schools that have the capacity to take on a program of this magnitude tend to do substantially better than those that kind of force their way in. We learned that in the early years and try to fix things on the back end. Once we have that approval, they will start TLP Academy, what we call TLP Academy. So we'll do a needs assessment to see what does the school need? Why are they looking? Is it recruitment? Is it retention? Are they looking for 3rd grade math help? It really depends on what are you looking for? What kind of positions do you need? And we'll start creating that model with them. Start looking at strategic scheduling. We'll look at their budget. What can you afford? How can we maximize the impact of that program based on what you have? And then communication and implementation. That communication piece is big, because it's not just the teachers in the building that you are laying this out to. It is the community. It is the parents. Everyone is involved in this step, because you say, why is my child's class suddenly larger? Well, it's larger because there's another person in that classroom teaching with them that it has a proven history of high leverage, high impact on students. So having them understand what the program is and what the benefits of the program are is really, really important. So we provide schools with a list of a very wide range of resources, and it helps kind of ease that in. They can just tailor it to what their school's needs are. And then that last part of school onboarding is recruiting teachers and posting those positions. Schools are only allowed to hire from those already accepted into the talent pool. That is twofold. There are a couple benefits to that. The first is principals know when they are pulling someone in for an interview that they are getting someone that has already been pre-screened. We know that they've made the impact depending on their maximum role determination, where the talent pool screening committee said which position they can assume. We know what their capabilities are. That second part is also a school culture piece. Is if a person might say, I'd like this position, the principal is not the one limiting them if they're not ready. What it does is it gives the principal an opportunity to invest in that person and make sure that we're training them up so that they are ready during the next cycle to try to take on one of our positions. And we could look at the next slide, and I'll give you a little bit more of a breakdown into what TLP Academy is. So we typically, up until this year, did 3 in-person days, full day trainings on site, and then we would follow it up with school site support. We've noticed that in this year, we've had some challenges, and I think every district across the country has had some challenges in terms of staffing, in terms of many different things going on in the building, trying to fill in gaps in recruitment. So we tried to streamline the process to make it more approachable and a little bit more flexible. We've moved to an asynchronous format, and this is housed within Canvas. The schools will have about 5 months to complete all 3 modules, and depending on how fast they finish that first module says when they can actually hire. They're not allowed to hire until Module 1 is completed. And there's a reason for that. Module 1 of TLP Academy gives them the real bones basics of what they need to look at. What are they looking for in these teacher leaders, how the models work. We don't want anyone bringing people on or promising positions before we know that they're ready to actually implement them. The other part is having on-site support. So after Module 1, we will provide on-site support to make sure that we are prepped, rolled out. Communication has been very effective. If they finish Module 1 in the current school year, they hire teacher leader positions, but the other 2 modules, which really jump in and get into that nitty gritty of how to maximize the program, aren't done by the due date, that school cannot implement in the following year. And that's extremely important, that we don't want schools jumping ahead before they are ready. They're not out. It's just another year to coach and support and make sure that they have the opportunity to gain those skills before full implementation. So here on the next slide is just one more piece about how we schedule. So scheduling teacher leaders to impact larger number of students through a variety of options. So we've got that multi-classroom leaders, we've got time technology swaps. What we've done is we've had, say, for instance, an expanded impact 3 teacher is the teacher of record for 50% of the day. They teach their classes normal, just like any other wonderful teacher during the mornings. While they are released to go coach in the afternoons, we have that instructional associate or that reach associate in the classroom with that group of kids. And what they're doing is they are relooping and reviewing, and they're using pre-made materials made by that EIT3 to make sure the kids are kind of practicing while that EIT3 is now coaching and leading instruction in another room. So there are different ways to kind of move the program around to kind of leverage the roles based on what each individual school's need is. So what impact does that actually have? We can look at the next slide and the one right after this. Thank you. So we have big impacts that we've seen here. So student outcomes is one of the biggest ones. When we have teachers that are supported by an MCL, they will typically have EVOS growth that moves from the 49th up to the 69th percentile. And this is within CMS after 3 years of support. Over the same period, our team teachers that were not supported by an MCL had decreases over time. So our regular classroom teachers that didn't have MCL access. And that really speaks to the impact of having a multi-classroom leader there to kind of guide your instruction and your practice and really help teachers fine tune things. In the next slide, we could talk about evaluation ratings and the impact on that. When you look year over year, our non-TLP teachers in CMS did on the first year better than our team teachers on an MCL1 team. But when you look at the impact of having a consistent MCL over 3 years, we saw that 1.5 times more likely to receive a rating of accomplished or distinguished than teachers that are not on MCL teams. That's big. That is big for teacher satisfaction. That is big for student performance because the evaluation tool translates to the impact that those teachers are having on kids, but it also really helps retention. When you have teachers that feel like they're being coached up, supported, and they are moving towards something in a path in their careers, they're more likely typically to stay. And this next slide, you'll see something that looks familiar that Stephanie had discussed earlier, that teachers on MCL teams have gains that are equal to that top quartile in math and nearly that in reading here. We've tailored our talent pool to ensure that we continue to recruit folks that have similar impacts, that have impacts like this. So what we do in our talent pool is our Office of Accountability will analyze what these teachers our applicants are doing and what the performance was on tests in the past couple of years. And they'll set new thresholds for us to use for data. And those data thresholds ensure that we're also recruiting the top quartile of teachers into these leadership roles. And in this last one, this is another big one that has really become very important during these last few years. On the next slide, we can see the attrition rates. When you compare TLP schools, teacher leader pathway schools. And this is not just folks in positions. This is also folks that are supported by TLP teachers. They have a much lower rate of attrition compared to that of the district. We recently did a study and we saw that we actually, we're doing okay as a district. We weren't terrible, but our TLP schools were doing significantly better. And I know that I am running out of time, so I will wrap this up quickly here. This last part over here is that the program gives you the ability to really kind of flex based on the challenges that you face. So with the COVID-19 pandemic, with teacher shortages and support for high need schools, what we were able to do with our teacher leaders is give them the flexibility to get into those vacant classrooms, to merge those classrooms and kind of rebuild the model using that TLP, using the benefits of TLP and the access that TLP provides to meet the needs of schools that might have been short-staffed at the moment or had challenges with in-person instruction versus virtual instruction. In this slide over here, last slide, I will talk real quick about moving forward, what we are doing. We are effectively scaling. One more slide, please. One more slide, please. Thank you. We are effectively scaling to take on the whole district to have a district-wide implementation model. We now have full district support. We are excited. Our team has grown. We've really invested in this, and we will continue to provide targeted professional development to build the skills of schools. Very quickly, we'll say this. While school districts typically want to provide PD that focuses on instructional techniques and content, we focus more on leadership skills. We focus on communication, organization, the skills that our instructional leaders who have already proven that they can have that impact on kids need in order to really widen their grasp and spread those abilities that they have a little bit wider. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Bashay. I think what Sarah has placed in the chat really is evident in the slides and the growth that you have shown, that this program has really been a game changer for your district. So I appreciate all of the things that you've shared today. We are going to switch gears a little bit and hear from community voice from our local grade level reading campaign leaders in Winchester, Virginia. This campaign in Winchester is led by two dynamic leaders in Andy Gale and Matt Peterson. And of course, their full bios are in the chat now. Their voices in this session are really vital to the conversation because we know that the work that they are doing outside of the classroom supports most likely the same students that are being supported within the classroom. And so it is the same students that are being impacted. So in the spirit of that connection, we're going to offer just a little bit of context around what's happening at the grade level reading level with Andy and Matt sharing that community voice. And then after they do their share, we will transition to the school district perspective in Winchester to hear about how they are implementing opportunity culture. So I'm going to pitch it to Andy first and then to Matt to share a little bit more about the literacy coalition that's happening in Winchester.
Sounds great. Thank you all. As I mentioned, we're the partners that are doing the campaign for grade level reading here in Winchester. We're in the pointy part of Virginia outside of DC. The John and Janice Wyatt Foundation brought this to our community. We stepped in as the backbone lead. And it's pretty neat. So the next slide, we'll sort of talk about the brief overview for anyone that's not familiar with the campaign, but seeing as you came here through the national campaign. I won't go into the boring details, but really it's looking at how we as a community can remove those sort of roadblocks and barriers so that the teachers that are really the ones trained to implement those best skills, teach the kids to read, can have that ability to do so. The Wyatt Foundation brought it to Winchester, literacy volunteers. We've been around about 38 years, and then this last year expanded to do community literacy for all ages. So while we in the past had only focused on adult literacy, we've now jumped to do community literacy, and that's large part due to the campaign. The next slide, we'll sort of talk about sort of how we decided that we need to get involved. When Matt first brought this up, we looked at some data and we knew there was a literacy issue for adults in Winchester. About 24.7% of the adults were having a literacy issue. And then we started looking at this data for 21-22. It was actually the 2021 data, but this is our latest data looking at our school district. And this by no means is attack on what Jake and his team are doing. They're our best partners in this quest. You'll see we have high cost of housing burden, free and reduced meal eligible, things like that. So the school districts are already providing a lot of support to those in our community. Kindergarten readiness, you see our scores there, about 64% ready, 50% split on the third grade standards of learning assessment. That's our state test here in the Commonwealth. And we'd love to see that number go up. A lot of people you jump down to the maze assessment, which gives a little more insight into the reading. We're a little higher there at 61%. And then chronic absenteeism, we're sitting about 23%. So we knew as a community, there's stuff we could do to help the schools and help the kids get on grade level. This next slide is going to talk a lot about sort of our goals. We want to increase kindergarten readiness to 80% or higher. That's starting pretty much from birth to 5, looking at how we can provide programs such as the Dolly Parton Imagination Library, work with all the preschools in the area, work with the parents, work with the libraries to sort of add a little more emphasis on literacy in those early years. We want to increase that third grade reading proficiency to 75% or higher. And out of school time, when the kids aren't in the classroom, when they're on summer break, when they have after school care, yeah, it's great they're getting out and getting to play, but is there ways that we can inject a little more literacy, a little more education into those out of school times? And we want to dip our chronic absentee numbers to 10% or less by 2025. Most of our goals are 10-year goals. As Jake will talk about in his slides, the school district's on a plan. They have a strategic plan for 2025. So we upped our absenteeism in line with them at 25. So as I mentioned, Literacy Volunteers is running day-to-day operations with support from the Wyatt Foundation. We have a coalition now of over 20 members working on the 3 buckets: the school readiness, the out-of-school time, and school attendance. Next slide, we'll talk about our partnerships, which is really where I think this comes to really support the communities. You see large in the center, our closest partners are the public schools. We couldn't do it without them. Their staff, their teachers, they've always been there. They support what we're working towards, and we want to work with them to better all outcomes. But you'll see we have a little bit of everything on there, everyone from our United Way. I saw a question in the chat earlier about how the United Ways can get involved. Ours here did a big study on asset limited income constrained individuals in our community. So they have a connection with resources that we can plug parents in and keep that there. We have the library system, which has been very integral in helping. But then also you see for-profits with the bookstore in town, Pediatric Associates, things like that. The community colleges here and the Top of Virginia Regional Chamber is joined because they see the importance of working on this now so that we have a strong and thriving workforce in the future. So just a quick snapshot of sort of the agencies and people that come to our campaign.
Thanks, Andy. And first, I want to say thank you all for being here. It's humbling to be a part of such an august panel. Our role has been to help launch the campaign in Winchester. We're also doing that concurrently on the Eastern Shore in a community out in Maryland. And so running both of these campaigns simultaneously has been a really exciting opportunity and challenge, but a great way for us to share information. Understanding, the campaign is a collective impact model in many ways, and building this coalition of partners, it was essential early on to establish a shared vision, which Andy shared, in terms of some of the goals that we're trying to achieve as lagging, sort of broad impact indicators. What I wanted to share in the next few minutes is just twofold. One is sharing the framework of how we're evaluating our progress. And then secondly, a little bit about our strategies and getting maybe a little more detail about how we're trying to put all this together as a theory of change. So on the next slide, I just, I put up a copy, screenshot of our scorecard, having a shared vision, but having this shared set of metrics that all of these community partners that are participating. And I would say we have, out of the 20 plus partners, maybe 10 or so that are actively involved running a program that's, synced in with the campaign's activities beyond just being an active participating member. And so I shared a screenshot. The way that we decided to do this early on was looking at smart sheets. There's probably a million different and or better ways to evaluate progress, but we did not want to start collecting a ton of data early on and then figure out how we're going to share this and disseminate it and be able to communicate what we're doing. And so we use Smartsheets. It's sort of an Excel, easy to operate interface that has the ability to send notifications. All of our partners can come on this. We're fairly centralized in the data collection approach. I and Andy sort of handle most of the data collection and reminders, but it allows all the partners to nest their various activities into the scorecard and see how they are operating within each of those major work groups. It also has the ability to provide a graphic dashboard that has embed codes that you can put into websites. And so again, there may be other ways to do this. This was how we decided early on to bring in our metrics and to be able to show how we're doing externally in terms of tracking these leading and lagging indicators. On the next slide, the second component to sort of a threefold look at assessments. We wanted to also develop an internal assessment that really is meant for our, I think we have 9 or 10 steering committee members at this point, to be able to assess ourselves internally, nothing that would go out to the public, but looking at these 6 domains that each have a series of, sort of key descriptors that would allow you to determine whether or not you're achieving, developing, excelling, et cetera. So this is an internal assessment that we use. We just did our first one this past week and are looking to do this every 6 months where we can see how we believe we're performing, and then also drive action based on what we're seeing in terms of results. So that's internal only. And then the last sort of lens that we're looking at data is looking at how are we providing value. Each of these organizations, I've seen a lot of campaigns very centralized. I've seen some very decentralized. On the next slide, it's really looking at, how do we communicate value to our partners as well as to the community. Looking at 10 years down the road, it's hard to get businesses or donors to say, hey, I'm invested in this. I'm going to continue to put in resources, hoping that 10 years from now, we see improvements in all of our major lagging indicators. So we wanted to find ways to be able to articulate how we're performing to the community in terms of why an individual organization isn't necessarily more effective than bringing the synergy of having multilateral partnerships come together. But also doing that in a way that provides the same amount of value proposition to our members. How are we incentivizing our partners to continue to put more time and resources into supporting the campaign? And they need to be able to also understand that these campaigns are having values above and beyond what they could do individually. So those are the 3 major ways that we're exploring assessing performance. I wanted to, in terms of the theory of change, on the next slide, the other graphic that we've been looking to build was why is one individual organization doing work good? How is working as a campaign better? And we looked at sort of a stacking philosophy whereby we look at each different sort of major age bracket. We looked at sort of prenatal and early childhood, the 3-year-old daycare space, getting kids kindergarten ready, and then moving all the way up into reading and getting on the literacy markers, hit those by the 3rd grade. And then stacking interventions. If we were to present a text messaging ready for K program in one organization, yes, that's great, and that does some work. But what if those individuals, the kids that need it the most, are getting not 1 or 2 interventions, but 5, 6, or 7, and then wrapping all of the campaign together so that the programs and the activities that organizations are doing are nested, they're coherent, and they're building and complementary to one another. So when Jake describes the opportunity culture that's being done in Winchester Public Schools, that is a component of, and we're not taking the credit for what's happening in Winchester Public Schools, but we want to be able to show a whole picture of what the entire community is doing, how it's layering by age group, to the point where we're hoping to build a passport system where we can really look year over year and say, did this particular student get 1, 2, 5, or 10 different supports along the way, realizing and recognizing that the more the better. So this is our way of visually putting together how the program works, how it's compatible and complementary to the scorecard, and seeing where the gaps are and where we may need to continue to try to find community solutions to help support our school district. On the next slide, just one approach that we took, we call it the triple stack. It is, trying to bring together what the school district is already funding, which is the Ready Rosie program, which is meant for birth to 5. And it's more of an email heavy open attachments kind of program. And we also see that maybe not all families are going to spend the time to do that. So we brought in Ready for K, which is a high click rate text messaging based program that also offers family tips to complement that. Parents can sign up for both, or they can sign up for one. Ready for K is also, you can auto enroll school districts. And so you can get a large number of people very quickly. And yes, Vroom is another option we explored. Our school district was already funding Ready Rosie for our pre-K 4. And so that was already out there, and we decided to leverage what was already in existence. It's already been built into the budget and work with that. And then Andy and his team brought on Dolly Parton's Imagination Library. So building those 3 together and being able to market those as opportunities for all of our kids was just one approach we've taken within the school readiness bucket. And then that's just an example of trying to take the theoretical and make it a little more granular. And then lastly, on my last slide, I wanted to share just some other approaches that we've been exploring. Again, looking at the multilateral partnerships versus doing individual work and some of the benefits to working as a campaign. We started this past year a community literacy instructional program, which was designed to get staff that are working with kids in different capacities outside of the school or even inside the school more opportunity to learn techniques for teaching literacy to children. And so it's meant for after school and summer program staff, daycare staff, instructional assistants within the school district, and long-term volunteers as well. And so that is being run by our local community college, supported by our library system, literacy volunteers, and us. And so we have 4 different partners working on growing this type of activity that we hopefully will, in terms of sustainability, we hope to actually become a credit program within the community college. And then lastly, down at the bottom right, we have a picture of the Kona ice truck. We are working as a community with the school district directly to try to create incentive campaigns for improving attendance. We ran that once in September. It was hugely successful. Ran a different model in January, and we're also looking at one in May. And the idea behind that being trying to identify those key points in the school year where we're seeing large numbers of unexcused absences in particular, and trying to drive improved attendance through gamification of activities for the kids. And again, it's been very successful with some wonderful lagging effects that bleed into the following months. So again, something we're testing and that we think we might want to continue. But those are just some examples of some of the work that the campaign's doing in partnership with one another. And Malay, in the benefit of time, I want to go ahead and pause there and then turn it back over to you. So thank you for hearing what we're doing in Winchester.
Great, thank you so much. Matt and Andy, I heard several times you making note and acknowledging the relationship that you have with the school district. Since Opportunity Culture is largely a program that happens within the district, I want to thank you for your time and sharing what's happening for students in Winchester when they are supported by your program, where we can see this very holistic approach of how literacy is being addressed. And so it is at this time that I would like to introduce your school district partner, who is Jake Bola, Executive Director of the PK through 12th grade curriculum and instruction from Winchester Public Schools. Similar to Bechet, he is also a former teacher and brings a wealth of knowledge and experience and empathy into his role supporting the teaching staff that are at the district. So let's just take a moment and listen to Jake and hear how they are implementing Opportunity Culture, and then we will shift into our small group discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody that's presented ahead of me. You've actually given all my information, so wanted to just take a moment to go through some of what we're doing different than Bechet is that it's our first year working with Opportunity Culture, and so this gives us an opportunity to kind of see where we're starting, why we started. And I'm already taking notes on contacting Bechet for some of his ideas that they've shared. So If you go to the next slide, kind of give you an introduction to Winchester. We're a small city school system of about 4,100 students. And as you can see, 77% of our students are now qualifying for free and reduced, and 25% of our students are English language learners. So we've in Winchester, we've seen a huge shift in our demographics population. And so partnerships with groups like Andy's and Matt's is really important for us. So when our students are coming to us in kindergarten, they're ready to roll. And as we all know who have been in education, that's a challenge when you're looking at anywhere from 50 to 70 to 80% free and reduced families. So if you go to our next slide. Of course, with that population demographics, typically, as we see an area of need is, of course, our reading, and then breaking it down even further with our students that are economically disadvantaged. We have our students with disabilities, our Black students, and what has come out specifically around COVID has been algebra and Algebra 1. We've seen a drop, as most school systems have, in our math scores. And so having everything as a vision for what we wanted to do to help improve, we've looked at our strategic plan that Andy has mentioned before. If you go to our next slide. So on this slide here, you've just kind of a breakdown of what drives our vision for instruction. So when we're talking about teaching and learning in particular, these are our objectives in our strategic plan. And what's really been exciting this past year is Virginia has actually worked on a literacy act to really support the importance of reading instruction. I know North Carolina is kind of in a similar boat and have been talking about letters and how instruction or reading instruction is really needing to kind of shift a little bit than what we've been doing previously. And so for us, this is really important in terms of how do we drive that instruction and lead that instruction. And on the next slide, if we're looking for leadership and instruction, we need quality teachers. And as almost any school leader can tell you, it has been more and more challenging to find quality teachers. Some are leaving the profession. Some are, wanting to go into administration. And our colleges are not seeing kids even coming into college ready and wanting to teach. So I've got a breakdown here of our turnover for the past 4 years. Last year, actually, we had improved pretty significantly. But our goals for staffing is really looking at highly qualified candidates and increasing our retention of those teachers. And so where we are as a city school system, about 30 minutes away to 45 minutes away is that green column in Loudoun, and there's a significant pay increase. And so not only is it just about pay, but also looking at quality of teaching, quality of the support that we give to our teachers. And I noticed someone in the chat had mentioned about getting district buy-in. Here's where it's at, to me, is when you're talking about the difficulties in filling positions and keeping quality candidates and the diversity of your qualified teachers. The only way to do that is really to, for me, is to pay them more and to find a way to do that. On top of looking at our needs for reading and math, we want the best teachers with the best kids. I have 4 kids personally, and I want the best for my kids. And so each parent wants the best for their kids. And so how do we take those top tier teachers and give them more influence on more students? And so I always use a story when I'm talking to principals where as an elementary principal, open house, I had a classroom that did not have a teacher. And so a highly affluent school, parents very concerned. And, you know, I talked to a number of them that night. And what I told them was, you would also be standing in here if you saw the people that I interviewed be in front of your student. And so we still have to keep our expectations high, and we can't lower those expectations or just fill spots. As Stephanie said, you know, oftentimes we're just filling it with a long-term sub. And so making sure that when we have that expansion of an MCL and that influence of a quality teacher, and using those to benefit our students. So next slide. So we this kind of, and this is almost identical to what Bashay and Stephanie had shared. You know, when we looked at how do we want to implement such a change where we have our most effective teachers having influence over students, we had done some research and had previous experience. Our superintendent and myself both were in North Carolina previously, and knew of opportunity culture. And so when we looked at the support that we could get and having an opportunity to write a grant, we won a $7 million grant with the U.S. Department of Ed, an EIR grant. And along with that was a lot of other things in terms of teacher retention and, you know, professional development and reorganizing our entire HR system. So, but again, all of that is to keep quality candidates. And so with that, we were able to begin our partnership with Opportunity Culture, and we're jumping into year 2 right now. So on our next slide, we kind of looked at different models, a little bit similar to what Stephanie had shared earlier as well, is having them support our conversations as a division, as to understanding the opportunities that we had with different models of teaching and classroom structures. And again, having those supports in place for teachers. One, teachers that are coming out that we know may not be essentially prepared for maybe a Title I elementary school, which all 4 of our elementary schools are. But also having those other like reading instruction, having that knowledge base may not be there, but there's potential for it. And so when we talked about this, we also talked about we have instructional coaches in each of our schools, and as many school systems do. And one of their frustrations with their position is they have a lot of people that they want to coach, and there's not enough time in the day. And so oftentimes they feel like they're not completing their coaching cycles or putting out fires with teachers. And we, looking at these models, kind of showed us an opportunity to say it's not only instructional coach, but an MCL could have a smaller group of teachers that they're focused on, and being able to support those teachers and, you know, just expand some of their role as an instructional leader alongside some of our instructional coaches. So you think of it as the MCL is working hand in hand with their team, whereas sometimes those instructional coaches are just popping in every once in a while when they can, or if they are, you know, scheduled, but it's a little more disconnected than an MCL. If you go to the next slide, I also saw somewhere where someone asked how philanthropy can help. You know, when we talk about stipends, and yes, it's always good where we are able to sustain it with our planning. As Bashay had mentioned, you know, it's something that you want to make sure that you're not relying on something else and then if it gets pulled away, you're not able to support it anymore. But I do think there's an opportunity to where if there are available supports in place to kind of help with some of the stipends and the activities with planning those, that's a valuable talking point with partnerships. And that's where we started off using the grant, but it allowed our principals to kind of breathe a little bit, where if you lose a position or something, you're kind of struggling with what to do. But having that grant allowed to kind of front load a little bit of the stipends and the RA positions to help support it without losing positions or reallocating positions. Next slide. So the next few slides are just kind of about our process and how we kind of went about it. First, we looked at, of course, our division goals, and then we started talking about individual schools. Similar to what Bashay had mentioned, not everyone is going to have the same needs. And so making sure that principals are really taking a look at their student data, looking at the needs of their teachers and expanding, making sure that fits into the plan. And so with that is talking with opportunity culture, looking at each of those plans and almost having those side-by-side conversations was really beneficial for school leaders in terms of how to make sure that is what your school really needs and how you're going to move along with it. And of course, looking at boundaries and limitations in terms of personnel and your budget. Next slide, please. And so this kind of highlights some of our implementation and our designs. Again, like I said, the schools looked at their models and expectations. The one thing I think Bashay kind of mentioned it too is making sure that you're not designing your plan around a person. And sometimes that's really hard. If you're a school leader, you're like, gosh, I would love to have her be this MCL. And so you try to kind of shoehorn some things to make it fit, but really it needs to be about the students and the physician making an impact on that and not just a specific person. And so from there, our division leadership team, which consists of about 4 of us, look at all of their plans in terms of sustainability and feasibility. Virginia in particular has pretty strict guidelines in terms of classroom class sizes. And so we have to kind of follow within those, looking at their funding, positions to possibly trade in to say, I can trade this position into take on all the stipends, for instance. Looking, of course, at our high school program of studies and things like that. From there, we developed a screening interviews for the MCL position. And so with opportunity culture, we kind of developed the criteria and had our behavior interviews, and making sure that we had all of those interviews in place. And so the screening happened to where we created a pool of candidates. And so from that gave us an opportunity to tell principals, here's some feedback for these candidates, areas that they may do really well in, areas that they may struggle a little bit. And so that kind of guided the principals in terms of who they would choose for their positions. Next slide, please. And this is just, I use this slide as just an opportunity to show like how much support that opportunity culture does put in for us in terms of resources and activities to kind of go through. It's extremely valuable, especially I think for a small school system for like us. It is it's really beneficial to have some of these things already done instead of creating all of these new things to supply and guide some leadership decisions. So next slide. So currently we have 15 MCLs and we have 14 Reach Associates. And looking at planning for next year, we're looking at possibly 23 in total MCLs with 20 RAs. And so it just now in particular, we're starting early stages of planning, but principals have a better understanding of the MCL role. And so that's giving them some opportunity to really think about their next steps and where the supports are needed for their teachers and students. Next slide. As I'm sure Bishay can probably agree, there's been growing pains. And so one of the things for me is really making sure that we have a clear common message and understanding with our administrators, our staff, and our families. In a new role, obviously developing relationships is something that has been a challenge for some of our teachers. And especially the majority of our MCLs, it's their first time out of the classroom. And those of you that have been teachers and then moved on to other positions, whether it's a coach or administrator, those first few months of jumping out and seeing other teachers in their classrooms can be a surprise. So that's been something to work through and guide them through that. Again, best fit and placement of staff, taking a look at the roles and responsibilities. This year was an odd year for us because 6 out of the 7 principals that developed the plans for the school are no longer there. They're either in different roles or had moved on to other school systems. So now we've got principals in there that are developing plans for next year, and it's just been a challenge for them to work with a plan that wasn't developed by them. They may have had some input, but that's been a challenge. Next slide, please. So looking at our plan for the future is, continuing to clarify that role, updating those plans. And we've been doing a lot of visits. Opportunity Culture has allowed us and supported us in visiting other school systems, getting into classrooms that have already been established, meeting with principals and other MCLs to kind of support how do we improve, and taking those other growing pains from other divisions and making sure that we don't make the same mistakes. Again, PLC development is something that we've been working on, and having those MCLs be a major leader in those. And again, looking at the class size requirements are always a challenge when we have to really try to expand some of this in terms of looking at roles, but still meeting and within those guidelines. So, and the last slide is just, overall talking about our successes. The hands-on approach to our coaching has been really beneficial. Our teachers and even our MCLs are really enjoying having that role and support. Looking at the instruction and the quality of instruction, Bishay's charts over time, are enlightening, and that's what we're hoping to see here as well as in our finishing our first year. We are seeing it in making those impacts on our local assessments, and so it'll be really encouraging for our MCLs for the work that they're doing. And again, just developing leaders and keeping those quality teachers at the forefront when they're supporting our teachers, so, and our students, of course. So, all right.
Thank you so much, Jake.
Apologize.
You're good. I just really appreciate how you have shared out the similarities and also the differences between how you are implementing this within your district as compared to Bechet, and definitely having your voice beside Matt and Andy's position, showing how Winchester is getting a full spectrum of supports for their students. Just really have a lot of appreciation for what you're doing. So thank you so much. We have about 3 minutes left. So obviously we will not be going into breakout rooms, but I wanted to share with everybody here today just a quick poll for you to please take as we look at continuous improvement for our sessions, but also to make note that we will be sharing out a follow-up message that has all of the resources that each of our presenters have given today, and also contact information for how you can contact any of us as you're looking to implement this within your own district, or if you're looking to see how there could be some partnership opportunities between your local campaign work and the school district. We do have one last slide to share, which is about upcoming sessions. So I'll give Sierra just a chance to throw that up, but we do have a session that's happening later today around learning loss recovery with creating environments and conditions for thriving kindergartners. And I do want to also make note that we will have opportunity culture presentation at the end of this month as well, in that last session around preventing burnout and investing in teacher and coaching support. So now I just want to take a moment. Thanks for everybody for joining in today. Happy Valentine's to everybody, and we will see you next time. Thank you so much.